Okay, hi everyone, this is SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com, and I'm here with a video analysis. As I mentioned last week, I don't have a lot of time to play, and so I invited people to give me some games to analyze, and I'll do something for you. So I had my friend, Rao Quadruple Three, he sent this game in. He was white. He ended up winning this game, but he didn't make it easy, let's put it that way. Um, this game, the main highlight. Okay, sorry. Let me back up. There's really two phases in this game. There's the build up towards the climax, right? And then there's where the complications they absolutely hit. And so I'm going to try and divide this into two, essentially, where I talk about the build up, and then I try and go into the complications a little bit. And the most important thing, and I think this goes for everyone, but the lower your rating, the more it applies, and that's where it's possible to do the right move, but for the wrong reasons. Is that you could end up playing a move the computer completely agrees with, and people will say, yeah, that's the right move, but if you were thinking, X, Y, and Z, and none of those apply, well, even though you made the right move, it's still a mistake, because that thought process was incorrect. And if you keep thinking that way in future games, it will come back to bite you. So what I want to look at is, well, that, essentially. So we'll take a look. Rao was white. Starts off d4, d5. The opening for the first 5 moves was pretty standard. We both develop knights. Bishop comes out. Bishop comes out. e3 is played. Queen b3 is always interesting if he develops the bishop without taking first, but this is fine. And then here, black plays g6. It's a move. It's not my favorite move, but it's a move. Bishop d3, and then he plays bishop e6, which we can clearly see is a waste of time, and just not a very good move. You move the bishop out, he moves it right back, and it's blocking the e-pawn. It's true, he wants to put his bishop on g7, but the e-pawn, it can come to e5 in some variations, right? Breaking through. It can also just come to e6, where it's reinforcing the d-pawn more. And if you just can't move it, also the queen can't come out. It's not a very good spot for the bishop. I mean, black could have taken. Exchanges is fine, or he could just even wait, because the exchange isn't necessarily bad for black. Anyway, this is clearly an inferior move, and now here, the first real decision of the game, I suppose, for white, is that he plays c5, which I think it's a good move, maybe even the best move, because this really sets up a plan. Well, first of all, of course, I mean, with the bishop, black was threatening to take, and so we just moved the pawn. But now we've cramped black's queenside, so there's no real c5 break. And now this bishop is always going to be staring at these pawns here. So I think this is excellent. It also gives white a really easy middle game follow-up. We can develop our knight, we'll castle, we'll play b4, a4, rook b1, b5, something along this. We'll attack on the queen side because we've got the extra space there. Black has no real counterplay. It's not obvious our center is solid. So this is a really easy plan. Things go a little bit different. After bishop g7, here, Rao, he does something really concrete. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and then f4. So let's just back up. First off, is this something worth considering? And, it kind of is, really. If we, again, strategically, all of black's pawns are on dark squares. Sorry. All of white's pawns are on dark squares. And so exchanging the bishop and then playing f4, this allows our bishop completely open diagonals. It's got a firm control here on e5. And this bishop is clearly doing nothing, and it doesn't do very much for most of the game. The control of e5 is really nice, because that's going to stop black from ever playing e5 and trying to open the bishop. So, for instance, in this position, if black were to move this bishop somewhere, right, and then he was able to play whoops, I'm so good at these arrows, and then play e5 with an exchange, now this pawn's much weaker, and this bishop is pressuring a weak pawn. So that is sort of, that'd be really nice for black. When we play f4, we're almost perpetually stopping that idea, which is nice. And this is just, it's a pleasant position. At the same time, this this is the first hint that I'm getting that white is mixing up his plans a little bit. Or perhaps he's not so much playing with the plan as he's simply making moves. So back here, my suspicion is that he saw that this was a threat, and so he just played c5 to stop that threat. And then his main idea was he always wants attack on the king side, and so he takes, plays f4. And this is kind of a mix, because when we play c5, that seems to suggest to me we should be playing over here. When we play f4 now, and then the rest of our play really shows it as well, it looks like we're trying to play on this side of the board, most of the king side. And we have to be careful, because if we try and, in general, if we try and do everything in chess, we're often left with nothing. Our forces are spread too thin. It takes... our opponent has to make a lot of mistakes in order for us to get away with that. And that kind of is what happens here. Notice that at any point, again, black could play bishop f5. In fact, he could play... Whoops, let's not play that move. Let's play this move, bishop f5. Because after this, all right, this square is just as weak as this square. This pawn isn't that weak, really, because at any point, black is going to play e6. For example, let's say, queen c2, e6. And now this center is completely blocked, right? Both kings, they honestly don't even need a castle, because the center is never going to open up. White will still attack on the king side, and black, he's got interesting ideas of potentially, attacking over here on the king side, potentially. Or we could just sit here and do nothing because the center is so blocked and these positions are kind of yuck. But this is always a possibility. And if this were to happen, this would be a very different game. As it was, black instead, he plays bishop h4 randomly. And then after g3, he comes right back. Knight f3, knight d7. We should just back up here for accuracy's sake. Knight f3, knight d7. Here you play h3, which stops any bishop g4 ideas, which is correct. However, for accuracy, we should note back here, as soon as you play knight f3, black has this really annoying move. Bishop h3. Now, there's a potential threat of coming in here, and then you have to move your rook, then you can't castle. That could always be annoying. You can't castle regardless, because the bishop is, of course, controlling all the way down here. And the bishop has moved away, so the e-pawn can potentially move again. The bishop went from his worst piece. It's still maybe not a very good piece, but it's certainly annoying. In fact, I think you might have to do something like bishop... and even here, right? Anyway, so we should stop this. And so before we play knight f3, if you were to play h3 first, then black does something, you get the exact same position, but you're stopping black from getting that move in. Okay? Regardless. So here, h3, and then here he plays queen c7. We play queen c2, so things are still pretty normal. We're developing our queens. Then black, he castles queenside, which is kind of hilarious. It's important to note right here that all of white's pieces are pretty good, right? Knights are great, bishop is nice, queen's on a good square. In fact, queen's even eyeing the king, potentially. Whereas black's pieces are on much less good squares. I've harped on this bishop enough. This bishop is staring at a wall of pawns, so it's not doing much. No obvious open lines for the rooks. And this knight, in particular, actually, if you look at the game, it's really hard to figure out how do you get this knight into the game. Even if you gave black like 8 moves in a row, where do you put this knight? Like, you go here, there's no other squares. There's no other squares. And so black is really playing without that knight, which is unfortunate. And now he's castled on this side, and Raoul, he does what I think is excellent. He plays b4. Again, we outlined this plan. b5's coming, or a4's coming, and now that his king's over here, it's going to work even better. Potentially queen a4 is also a possible idea, pressuring this pawn, forcing another weakness, but the pawn breaks. Just get the pawns rolling. He realizes his knight's bad, he comes back, we bring this, and then black plays king d7, which is funny. Now, up to here, I think, there's that h3 move, maybe was more accurate. Playing f4, interesting idea, maybe not necessary, but in the end, white has got a pretty dominating position at this point. Again, I mean, when black is forced to move his king here, black's idea, by the way, is he realizes the pawns are coming, and so he's going to bring his king back and maybe bring him over here. So, and if you could think of a better move for black, you know, that'd be interesting. And now here again is where things start going wrong. Or that is, this is an incorrect decision, I believe. Just watch what happens here. Is that, well, this could have been punished. He plays e4. Now, does this move make sense? Yes, it does make sense, because black's king is still in the center, so we should open the center up. Right? That's, you know, attacking the king 101. But let's look a little bit deeper. Our king is still in the center. And so opening up the center is now, well, it's certainly double-edged. Now, after the exchange as well, black didn't take. All right, you can take back with something. That's fine. Black should probably move his king back, in all honesty. Now, just look at this. All of a sudden, this pawn is attacked by 2 pieces. And in fact, this bishop, which before, you know, when there was a pawn here defending it, the bishop was completely passive. Now we have to watch this pawn. It's really hard to advance to d5 because black has such good control over that square. And we're simply left with a weakness. If we ever do this, take, well, now the e file, whoops, is open up. And our king could be exposed. We're going to have to castle. Let's say we can't castle kingside. If we castle kingside, notice how that pawn's going to fall. If we castle queenside, that's kind of not what we want, because we want to have all these open files for our rook. Maybe we will have to do something like king f2. And let's just go here. And all of a sudden, black isn't doing so bad anymore. He can put his bishop here on d5. The bishop is great. His rooks are on open files. This pawn is stopping this knight from coming in. And it's not easy to find a good square for this knight. Potentially, something like this could happen. But as soon as it comes to c4, we're just going to take it. This position is, I think white is still probably better, but not as much as he could have been. And this actually makes sense as well. I mentioned, of course, that, yes, our king is in the center, but also, like, this bishop now becomes much stronger, and black's pieces become more active. And that's really the thing. Playing e4 doesn't make our pieces more active. Not really. In the end, if you look at that little variation, you know, d takes, take, boom, boom. What we've done is we've exchanged our knight, which was good, for his passive bishop. Now we have a weakness here. Black has an open file that he's going to use before we do. So, on the whole, this was an incorrect move. What happened, though, like, this is a move you should think about. Yes, opening the center when his king's in there, but we probably, like, this is where we castle. Maybe not there, because the pawn's there. Maybe we play g4, then we castle. Or maybe we castle by hand. Something like this. We get our king safe first. And then we can go hog wild on him. Because if our king is safe, we're fine. And we'll notice that, is that white, throughout this, never takes time to castle. He could have castled, you know, virtually from move 7 on. And instead, he does something different. Now, fortunately for white, is that after e4, black continues his plan, and he plays king e8. That allows e5, bishop comes back, g4. So now white can castle. In fact, white just has an absolutely dominating position here. So black has spent like 5 moves castling his king, then moving it right back. He's developed and undeveloped his knight. This bishop can barely move. The queen can barely move. None of black's pieces can do anything. And so the build-up so far by white, okay, it hasn't been very accurate, but black hasn't been able to capitalize. White's doing well. White's doing fantastic. This is a dream position. f6. Now, here's an example of where I'm really talking about the right move for the wrong reason. This following sequence of moves that white does, let's just see it here. So white plays f5, f takes e5, f takes e6, e4, knight takes, d takes, bishop takes. All of this, the computer likes. It's the first or second move. It still says white has a winning advantage, right? It's over 1.5 pawns, and that's great. Yay, go white. At the same time, it allows this. Queen g3 check. And all of a sudden, things are complicated. And if we don't play accurately, we can get a worse position very, very quickly. And that's what happens in the game. So let's back up. So the idea of the right move for the wrong reason. Or that is, we played f5. When you played f5, did you notice that this queen g3 was a potential idea? Or, going back further, right? It's here, after e4, perhaps you saw the knight takes e4, which is great, but the queen g3, this is the main threat, and the problem comes down to our king. And when I look at this position, or when I look at almost any position in which my opponent cannot castle, that means his king safety is a long-term weakness. Because like he can't castle. He's moved his king too much. He can never castle kingside. His king is stuck in the center. And so what that tells me is that I don't need to rush. Right? This isn't like I'm stopping him from castling, and then if he plays one move, he can then castle the next move. No, it's a long-term weakness. And so I should be very patient. Here is where we castle. Or king f2, king... Yeah, castling is fine. We can even castle queenside if we're not worried about attacking here. We're going to keep attacking the center. But we castle. And then we play f5. And that is fine. And we're going to do absolutely great. And what's going to happen is we're going to win the game, or we're going to get a very similar position, but black's going to have less counterplay. Because he's not going to have these checks against our king. And our rooks will be connected, and it's going to be great. So this is where we take a moment. We don't need to rush. We castle. Or we do something with our king. When you played f5, which was a good move, he takes, we take, e4. So we're up a piece temporarily, but he's got the fork. And so we play knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes. And so material is more or less equal again. I think we got a pawn, right? Yeah, we're up a pawn. Queen g3. Now this is the big moment, actually, is where do we put our king? And this is where the complications really start. And again, let me just remind that this was not necessary. If we take, one step, we don't have to worry about everything. Anyway, we're in check. What should we do? This is where we literally, by the way, need to look at every single possibility. It's not enough just to say, look at one or two. We have to look at everything. Because and this position is now becoming critical, and if we overlook one move, we can lose, right? And now it's a shame, because he's only attacking with one piece. However, his bishop and his rook are ganging up on this pawn, which is currently only defended by our knight. And if this rook move... there's some weaknesses in our position. If we play queen f2, which is perhaps the intuitive move, after take with check, it's a fork, so we're forced to recapture. Take, this position suddenly isn't very good for white. Or, well, right, all of a sudden we defend our bishop, he comes over, takes our pawn. And all of a sudden it's black who's up material. Let's back up. And the main thing, of course, is the computer says that there's one move here that's winning, everything else is draw or losing. Right? And so again, the right move for the wrong reasons. We could just play randomly here, get the one move the computer likes, and we're fine. But that's a pretty, that's not a very good recipe for winning chess. What are some other possibilities? It's pretty obvious we don't want to move our king over to the d file. The computer says, likes queen d2, because after bishop takes d4, we're both attacking the rook, and if the bishop moves anywhere, there's a discovered check on the king. So that just doesn't look very good. Let's look what happens in the game, and then we'll see why the other move was better. We played king f1, and then black continued, bishop takes d4, and now things are getting complicated. I think the best thing to do here is to simply look at the game continuation a little bit, to go forward rather than trying to dissect every single move and lose the flow of what's happening. And so, after black plays bishop takes d4, white has a couple of options. We do have to note that if our queen moves, black is queen f2 mate is always an idea. And of course, the bishop is attacking our rook. White decides to go for broke, where he plays bishop takes g6, after, and then of course, if pawn takes, queen takes, that would just be mate. That'd be very easy if that was all it took. Black, of course, doesn't take. After king f8, queen f5 check, he's forced to come back with f6. So notice how the bishop is pinned. So now our rook is okay for now. But now white has to find a move. And it's not so easy to find the correct idea here. In fact, it's very difficult. I didn't get it. Without the computer's help, I would have been nothing for me. And that really shows the difficulty of this variation that white decided to go into. He ended up playing bishop h5, getting the bishop away from the from taking. I think an interesting variation is what happens if bishop takes, and then what the counter is rook d5. So obviously, if the queen moves away, then the bishop's going to fall. If the bishop, and if the queen moves away, say to e4, well, now the rook will fall. And so the queen's doing double duty. It's protecting the bishop, and it's pinning this bishop, and it'd be forced to move. One move that would try and stop that, knight e5, but then it just gets taken. And, yeah. And so, in fact, the rook... taking the pawn is an option. And it's because of this rook d5 idea. And that's actually what happens in the game. After bishop h5, rook d5 comes in as well. And we see that, the queen moves, black wins a rook, black simply winning at this point. So let's back up. It's interesting to figure out what is the best move here. And the problem is this rook d5. And then our queen's forced to move. Is there any way we can prevent rook d5? I couldn't find one. And the computer suggests that king e2 is the only move. Why? After rook d5, we then play rook a to g1. Now the queen's attacked. The queen needs to move somewhere. Where's the queen move? Back to c7 is about the only spot. We retreat our queen, and then it's true that black ends up taking a piece. So temporarily, black is up a piece. The computer says, though, that after g5 and the bishop moves, white likely has some type of perpetual coming along. If we just look at a couple... again, this is getting advanced. Again, this isn't something I saw. This is something the computer says. And so the computer... black... So if we just look at the main line after queen takes in, and so we, of course, are threatening mate. Queen f4, rook g4, queen f5, take, and the computer says this position is completely equal. White's got 2 pawns for the piece already. He's got 2 passed pawns by the rook. It's a perfect 0.00 game. Is this complicated? Yes, it is. And what this is really showing is that it's possible to play a move which the computer says is fine, which is even good, and yet not be able to follow through at all. This happens to me quite a bit, is I'm looking through moves, and I find the right move, but I'm not able to prove it. I'm not able to find the follow-up moves. And really, this whole, if we back up, this whole bishop takes g6 idea, it was a good idea, except if black was forced to take it and you got mate in 2. But you don't. And so if we back up here, before we sacrifice, black has 2 main threats, right? One was to play rook d5 after our queen came to f5. Right now, with our bishop here, there is no rook d5. Rook d5 does nothing. The second problem was that this rook was always hanging, right? If we're not careful, bishop takes a1. And so if we were to find the best move in this position, it would be rook d1. And this actually does both of those problems that we were just looking at. Now the rook isn't hanging. We're actually threatening the bishop now. The bishop would be forced to move or to do something. And we're also, the rook would help control d5. So if this bishop were to move, you know, say it moves back, whatever, we're in good shape. And in fact, in this position now, just by inserting those 2 moves, all of a sudden, sorry, obviously he doesn't take. He moves over. Oh, do we see the difference? It's by playing this, he can't move his bishop back because now this is completely winning. By adding 1 move in, by adding 1 move, all of a sudden we go from trouble to not trouble. You can use your own dictionary. No, not dictionary. Frig, what's the word? For synonyms. Thesaurus. Wow. I need more sleep, guys. Sorry. But then it's tough. If he doesn't move his bishop, what does he do? And again, the computer... And I thought white was simply winning in this position after rook d1. But the computer says, I'm going to play rook g8. Why does the computer play rook g8? Because of the threat. The threat was bishop takes g6. Now, you might be thinking, but hold on, Smithy. Can't we just win a piece? And the answer is yes, we can. But then, after rook f8, we can see our king here on the f-file gets checked, and we're in trouble. What do? If we just bring it back with the piece, there's some mass exchanges, the rook's attacked, and all of a sudden we are up in exchange, but this queen is very, very annoying. There's a lot of checks to come on, and if we can ever trade queens, we're probably doing okay. If we can't, black can likely get a draw here, because our king is so exposed. Right? Isn't that a fantastic variation? Let's look at that one again. So from rook d1, first thing it's rook g8 to protect this square, so there's no sacrifices. And if we try and win a piece after rook f8, and it's our king on the f-file, that's the problem. So now, if I were to back up all the way to here, so black had just played queen g3, and we have to move our king. Where should it go? We know that if we put our queen in here, it just leads to a variation where black wins a pawn in an endgame. If we move our king to the d-file, we know that black's going to take this pawn, and then his rook will be lined up with our king. That's not very good. And we just saw that after king f1, there's some complications where eventually a rook comes to the f-file and checks us. So, where should our king go? That's correct, e2. Now, if it's the exact same thing, if black tries to continue with bishop takes d4, actually bishop takes g6 is absolutely crushing. And the reason is, after here, check, bishop f6, our rook slides over to g1, he's forced to move his queen back. Now we can move the bishop, we can take the pawn, we can do anything, because black has no threats against our king anymore. That's nice. Ooh, that's pretty good. But even better, or more to the point, is we're off this f-file, right? And so there's never any rook f8 checks coming in. That's it. Now it's true, we can do something like this. We come in with check, where we exchange queens here, but there's an important difference. And that's that our king is now protecting the d-pawn, and so black doesn't win that pawn back, and he doesn't win this pawn. And so this is a much better endgame for us. So this is really a long-winded way of me saying that after this queen g3 check, up till now you are winning if you can see through all of that the necessity of playing king e2. Okay? It's complicated, and you might be thinking, you know, how am I supposed to see all this? And it's true. It's tough, especially on the shorter time controls. When I was 1600, I didn't see this far. When I was 1800, I didn't see this far. I'm over 2000 now, and I still need, the computer still points out a lot of things to me. It's just, like, I'm not perfect, right? It keeps going up. At the same time, I hope this really highlights how the fact that had we simply castled or moved our king earlier, we don't have to deal with any of this. I don't want to say that's the secret of how I got a high rating, but it's really the secret of how I got a high rating, is that I blundered less. You know, I learned to blunder fewer times, and I also put myself in positions where I didn't need to find those only moves. The one move that would, you know, keep me the advantage and everything else throws it away. Or the opponent gets a vicious counterattack if I don't defend perfectly. And that's sort of my style. That's the way I prefer to play, and it's worked really, really well. And now here, it isn't even a stylistic question. All we had to do was castle before move 22, and we're okay. At the same time, let's keep going. Because the game's not over. So after take, you come back, boom, boom, h5, and it's that rook d5. If black doesn't find this move, he's just toast. Black does find the move, and after e4, he wins the pawn. So now, he wins a rook. And he's got, our king isn't very safe. Fortunately, we don't give up, because he's playing without this knight, right? This knight's doing nothing, and this rook isn't doing much right now either. And his king is still open. We still have a chance. Why not? Let's keep going. You play g5, which I think is a great move, in all honesty. What does g5 do? Well, for one, if we were to check again, if we can check on the f-file, now there's no bishop f6, we can take it. And also, it frees up, now our bishop can slide back, or our queen can slide over. I think practically, it's probably the best move. It gives you the best chance. And then immediately, black plays rook d1, which the computer says throws his advantage completely away, which is hilarious. So let's back up. First off, what would be a good move for black? It turns out there's about 8 of them. Knight a6, bishop c3, queen moves, just about anything, in all honesty. If we're looking at this position, white's king is on the f-file. And so if we can get a rook to the f-file, that tells us, bad things would happen. And so the best move is probably king g7. With the simple idea of coming over here, and we're in trouble. Also notice that this bishop is on the same diagonal as the king, and that makes it very difficult for white to get any checks or any attacks coming in. There's no... In fact, it's really hard to see how white, even white was given 2-3 moves in a row, how we actually check the black king. So this would have been the winning idea. Not easy to see. However, again, if you're thinking, all right, how do I get this rook in the game? Okay, king g, that goes in. That goes down to that correct thought process. Anyway, after g5, he plays rook d1. That allows king e2, and now he comes in queen g2, which gives us the rook. Then he takes, we move back, queen g2, king e3, so we're running around. And then queen takes h3. Oh my goodness. Then this whole little variation has a whole bunch of stuff in here. So let's back up. After queen g2, check. Well, let's look at that. So he takes the rook, he takes the rook. King e2, queen g2, king e3. At this point, again, if black were to play king g7, and then play rook over to f8, it's not clear what white does. What does white do right now? Again, if we ever move this knight somewhere, well, we're going to lose that pawn with check. We're losing a piece. So we can't move the knight. If we move this bishop somewhere, that doesn't really stop the rook f8 idea, which is coming in, and now black's pieces are getting coordinated again. If we move the queen somewhere, well, f4 looks like a terrible spot. Oh, I see. The computer wants to come over here. Well, then, and in the end of the day, black's up a piece in the endgame. And so the whole problem that we had, let's see, where was that move? What was that? Where were we looking at? Oh, yes, it's if black doesn't play h3, but instead black plays this king g7 idea, which is the main threat. So this actually gives us an interesting point, is that in this position, the only move to stay in the game is the paradoxical king e3. Isn't that fantastic? All right. I know, did the computer show me this? Yes, of course it did. Because there's a free rook here, is there not? Well, yeah, okay, so he takes the rook, and then white's got this counterattack, and it's incredibly strong. And the computer lists off like 8,000 variations, right, in which there's appears to be a perpetual check. Fantastic. I'm not going to get too much into that, because there's something else I want to say. Hold on. Because it's right here. Instead of playing king g7, is that it's funny, any other move except for king g7 actually loses for black. Or if it doesn't lose, it gives white a huge advantage. And queen takes h3 is one of them, because after queen f4 check, he brings the bishop back. We could take the bishop, or even better, okay, we attack the queen first. We take the knight with check, then we take the bishop, and we see that actually all of a sudden it's black who's in huge trouble, and black actually falls for a checkmate out of nowhere, in all honesty. So what happened? Because didn't I just say that black was had a dominating position, white was in huge trouble, and then all of a sudden black was like, what happened here in this position? The main problem for black here was this rook d1. And the problem with rook d1, well, as we saw, if king e2 and he takes the rook, after queen f5, white's gets this counterattack coming in, right? Boom, boom, boom. And those things are in huge trouble. And if he doesn't take, like he does in the game, where we go here and then after king e3, there's nothing. And even after he takes the rook, he has to find that one move, the king to g7. And so what really needs to happen here, if we're thinking for black, which is important, right? We might be in black's position someday. What we need to realize is like this rook is so incredibly powerful. And that this rook d1 is, I don't want to say it's a trap, but it's a trap. Because this rook, right, it's protected. Right, protected by the pawn. It's controlling f5, so there's no check. The queen controls this square, so there's no queen f4 check. And it's just fantastic. And in fact, white really has nothing here. And so it's true that black would need to find the king g7 and then move the rook over. But even if he doesn't find that, even after knight a6, what does white do? Right, how do we keep continuing the attack? Does g6 work? Whoops. No. Ah, shoot. Does rook g1 work? Nope. Oh, shoot. All right. In fact, it's really hard to find a good move for black. For white in this position. And again, this sort of goes back to what I said at the beginning, is that black doesn't need to rush. Black's up a rook. If he doesn't get checkmated, right, white has nothing he can do. And it's not even... It's hard to, again, think of a good move for white, which doesn't just lose more material or trade down. And so it's okay to play slow. I mean, I agree, it's hard. When you look at, and you see your king, if we were to flip the board, and we're looking at this from black's perspective, and our king is here, and there's a pawn, there's a bishop, and there's things near our king, and we could think scary, I gotta keep checking, I gotta keep moving. But if we can slow down, we stop, and we realize what is the concrete threat. There isn't one. White doesn't have a threat. Not really. Until we give him one. And it's when we moved the rook, or when, sorry, that's not the move I want. We played rook d1, and the queen comes, and look what's happened here. Is that now, the f-file is again available with f4, because this is now here. And there's no rook d5, there's no bishop f6, and white was able to win. It was great. So, a complicated game. And I'm not even sure if I explained those complications very well. What I want to do, though, let's go back to white, is in a summary, as a summary, is that a lot of those complications were simply unnecessary. Had we done our build-up better? And I'm thinking, let's see. So the question should always be, what's the main takeaway from a game? And I've covered a lot here. I'm not even sure if it's very coherent anymore now that I'm thinking back to it. But I'm thinking the main idea would be, that's never a good sign when I don't know it. It'd be, again, if you don't need to rush, don't rush. Now, this comes with experience, but some positions you need to, play with tempo. You've got to go, 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 or your advantage slips. If we look at this position, where he moves his king, back to e8, we got this e5 in, and he has no active pieces. None of his pieces can move more than one square in any direction without getting captured. We don't need to rush, right? We take our time. We improve every piece. We put our rooks where we want them. We put our knights where we want them. Our bishop, our queen, where we want them. Then we break through. How do you do that? Just about any way you want. And the only way you can really mess this game up, really, is if we give tactics to our opponent. And the only way we give tactics to our opponent is by rushing. And then what happened is, again, all these moves are quote-unquote correct in that they're the first or second move by the computer, and they all give a near or a winning advantage for white. But it makes our job much harder, to the point in which all of a sudden the game's equal. To which all of a sudden the game is really freaking complicated, and whoever makes the last mistake is going to lose. And that's not the way I want to play chess. And it's really right here, if our opponent doesn't take the pawn, we probably lose this game. He does take the pawn, and then you very correctly see the counterattack. Right? You take the knight with check, you take the pawn with check, the bishop with check, and then it's nice enough for black to let us checkmate. But if he doesn't, you got a huge advantage anyway. Okay, so that's enough of that. Hopefully that made sense, everyone. Hopefully you found that useful. I'm not sure if this was my my best one, but there you go. Again, until about Marchish, I won't be playing chess, but I still want to make videos. And so if you have a game you want analyzed, give it to me, and I will. I'll analyze it. This is the first one. I think one other person has given me a game. I think. I don't remember. I seriously need sleep, guys. Insomnia is tough. But anyway, send me a game. I'll analyze it. Be on the weekends. So yeah, that's that. If you got questions, hopefully that helped, Raul. Hopefully that helped. And anyone else have a game? I would love to analyze it for you. Otherwise, that's that. SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.